in this tutorial I will talk you through how I use this image of a long-haired cat from Pixabay to create a watercolour image using both wet on wet and wet on dry techniques. I will also talk you through the equipment that I used, including the watercolours and the colour pencils that I used at the end. So let's get on with the tutorial. So the first stage of our painting is actually planning out all of the colours. So I will give you a list of all the colours that you will need in a moment, and these can be for any set. I will be using a Winsor & Newton Cotman half-pan set, and I will put a card above of a review of this set if you are interested. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to wet down the area of the cat that I'm painting. The reason I don't wet down the other areas is because I don't want the paint to spread to those areas, and I'm putting a light wash of the burnt sienna across the cat. As you can see, all the colours that I will be using in today's demonstration are on the left hand side, so these are the colours that you will need if you wanted to paint this cat, but obviously you know, you might want to paint another cat, so you would need different colours, but these are the colours that I will be using for the painting of this cat today. So I'm going to start by painting the layers, and when I paint the background I will also wet that down with a large brush. This is the wet on wet area, and then in between I will dry it with a hairdryer, spray the back of it, put it in between heavy books to dry, and then start the next layer. But it needs quite a bit more of the process before I do that. So as I mentioned earlier, in between each of your layers you need to ensure that your paper is completely dried. So at the end of that first layer I dried my work with a hairdryer, which might sound a bit crazy, but trust me, it works as long as you make sure there's no loose paper around. And then I sprayed the back very lightly with some water spray. I then put it inside a heavy book and then placed lots of heavy books on top and let it dry completely before I then put it back on the table and put the washi tape back around it. The reason I did that is because I wanted to ensure that it was completely flat before I started adding my next layer. Now if I let the paper dry, even though it's good quality watercolour paper, there is still sometimes a bit of warping or a bit of a buckle to it, so then you risk getting little bits of watercolour paper inside. Now for this work today I'm not really applying a lot of watercolour to the paper. However, if I was going to, that would happen, and I just have got myself in the habit over the years of flattening the paper in between the layers because I like the paper to be nice and flat at the end. So that's a little tip if you want to do that. And also if you don't want to hang around for ages waiting for your work to dry, it's good to use the hairdryer to dry it in between. So now I'm applying some wet on dry. So I'm applying more details. That is why I'm using wet on dry, because, and some of the areas I'm doing wet on wet, but most of it I'm doing wet on dry because I want to have those nice detailed areas of hair flicking up. So I'm using now a flat brush, and all of the details of the equipment that I'm using today is in the description below. I'm using a couple of different brands of brushes and they will all be listed below. And the flat brush is really effective for getting those flat marks. As I mentioned earlier, all of the paint colours that I'm using are listed earlier. However, the colour that I'm mainly using now is a mixture of shades of sepia and Payne's grey. So now that the painting has entirely dried, I'm going to go in with some pencils, some coloured pencils, just to pick out some areas that need a little bit more detail. So I'm going to be using mainly Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils, and the links to all of the items that I've used in today's tutorial are in the description below, and I have put here a list of all the colours that I have used. I am also going to use a white Prismacolor pencil because the Prismacolor is more opaque. The Faber-Castell white is not as opaque, so it's not as useful in using on top of colours. So I'm just going to go over and add a few details, a few hairs, just add all of those details on top, just to add some finishing touches, because obviously with animals you want to add those little details and those little finishing touches to the pictures, all of the textures before you finish. So I'm now going to go in and add some fine details with a white gel pen, but if you wanted to, you could also add white gouache, but a gel pen obviously is easier to add detail. If you enjoyed this clip, then make sure you check out more clips like this in the watercolour playlist. Don't forget to look in the description below for details of products used in today's clip, and if you have any ideas for content or questions, leave a comment below. Finally, if you would like to see more content like this in the future, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future content.